to Nocturnal Frequency Radio, and you know what? This is a special live rebroadcast from last night's show, the second hour with Thomas B. Allen in discussing his book, Possessed, the true account from the actual diary of the assisting priest in the famous exorcism case in St. Louis, Missouri. The very one that spawned, or I keep saying spawned, I don't know why, that inspired the movie The Exorcist. Now, the reason why we're rebroadcasting this, it was a part of a 2-hour show, obviously, and in the first hour we had scheduled John Robert Colombo, who did in fact show up. We had some very, very severe technical difficulties. And, well, let's just say things got a little ugly. I very unprofessional on, I think, on his part. But I think that's as far as we're going to go as that. It's very unfortunate. Somebody I respected and thought was, I was really looking forward to interviewing, and unfortunately it turned out that way. Them's the breaks. You got to roll with the punches, and well, hey, move on. I don't think we will be inviting him back to the show, unfortunately, due to the way things unfolded. For those who listened to the show live, you know what I mean. You heard it. It was a fiasco. Anyhow, what doesn't need to suffer, though, is the very, very interesting interview that we conducted with Thomas Allen. Very intriguing, very in-depth look at not only the exorcism case, but the boy who was involved and the priests who were involved and the whole scenario around it. So for the next hour, please enjoy the rebroadcast of our interview with Thomas B. Allen.
Coming out.
Not really, but maybe we'll find out a little bit more about what really went down. So hold tight, folks. We'll be right back. All right, and welcome back to Nocturnal Frequency Radio. And, we're in the second hour. Once again, I'd like to apologize to John Robert Colombo for the poor audio conditions that we had in the first hour there. Hopefully we'll be bringing him back in a later date. But now, in the second hour, we have Thomas B. Allen, coming on to chat about his novel, The Possessed. Without any further ado, Alex, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Thomas, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
How do we sound? I just want to make sure we're all... Pardon me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Yes, can hear you loud and clear. Yeah, we were just having some audio issues there, and I just wanted to make sure that you didn't... we wanted to spare you from that. So, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, it's my pleasure. Sure. What's up?
For those who may not know, Thomas is an author of several books, and one being The Possessed, the one that we'd like to, sort of detail or discuss tonight. Where did the process begin with this book?
Well, I had come across a newspaper story. It was in the Washington Post saying that a priest who had taken part in the exorcism that was the basis for the movie The Exorcist, had given an interview to somebody in Omaha, and I tracked him down and talked to him, and it turned out that he had a copy of the diary that was kept by the exorcist during the long exorcism, and he gave me a copy of the diary, and I used that as the basis for looking into a book, and I did get a book out of it, as you mentioned. It was the first time that anybody had actually written up the exorcism that was the basis for the movie.
I wanted to point out to the listeners as well, if you want to find out more about Thomas, you can visit his website at tballen.com to find out more about his other books. Now your views on, I guess, exorcisms and the whole scenario that a person can be possessed by, I guess, something demonic or something evil. What was your vision, or what were your views going into writing this?
I thought it was a good story. I never really found myself believing that there was a demon that took possession of the boy. In the movie, the person who is being exorcised is a girl. In reality, it was a boy. And I think he was just a kid who had somehow experienced an event in his life that had made him believe that he was possessed by a demon or demons, and that the exorcism, which went on for about 2 weeks, did end with his believing that he was no longer possessed. And that all could happen without any necessity of there being a genuine demon.
So, I guess now, when you're saying that there was no genuine demon, then exactly, I guess mentally this person was unstable, or what, on a mental state. How this boy?
You have to really go back to 1949, and at that time there was very little understanding of how you treat people who suffered serious psychological problems. It was around that time that the movie The Snake Pit came out. There was a lot of tendency to just sort of lock people up if they showed any sign of being mentally ill. And he was a young boy, 12 going on 13, who started showing evidence of there being something wrong with him, and his family didn't know what to do about him. They were Lutherans. They took him to a Lutheran minister in town, in Old Town in Maryland, and the minister happened to be a believer in extrasensory perception, which was quite in vogue at that time. And he believed that the boy had extrasensory powers. But when he really examined the boy and spent an evening with him, he saw that there was something wrong with the boy in terms of the way he was acting, and the minister believed that he might somehow be possessed. He believed that this was not something he could handle, and he suggested to the parents that they take the boy to a Catholic priest, because the Lutheran minister, realized that the Catholic Church still believed in the ability of a priest to drive a demon out of the soul of a person who was under the influence of the demon. So that's what they did.
Okay. Now, how long did they actually the exorcism actually last for?
Well, in terms of there were two exorcisms. The first one was performed by the local Catholic priest. That lasted a very short time. The boy attacked the priest during the exorcism. The priest gave up on it, and the boy was then taken to relatives in St. Louis, where the priests from St. Louis University, who were Jesuits, heard of his situation, examined him, and determined that they would try another exorcism. That exorcism lasted about 2 weeks.
Okay. Now, in terms of the difference in, you said the first priest, the attempt was given up due to the boy attacking him. What was the severity of the attack to make him give up?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you on that one.
Sorry. Like the severity. You mentioned that the first attempt.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was the priest took the boy to Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, which was a Jesuit organization, and strapped the boy down to a bed in the hospital, began the exorcism. The boy reached under the bed and broke a piece of spring out from under the bed, the mattress in the bed, and stabbed the priest with it, breaking a wound down the priest's arm. And that ended the exorcism. But afterward, the boy was still showing signs of something being wrong with him. And his family decided that they would take him from Maryland to the family relatives in St. Louis, thinking that perhaps a change of scenery would change his behavior. But in St. Louis, he kept acting the same. Objects seemed to move around in his room. Things appeared as if something was scratching him on parts of his body. And a cousin in the house where he was staying told some of her professors at St. Louis University about this, and the Jesuits there decided that they would look into this, and after looking into it, suggested to the Archbishop of St. Louis that there ought to be an exorcism. You had to ask permission for an exorcism to be pronounced, and so he said, okay, but it's going to be that you Jesuits are going to do it. And one of the Jesuits was a Father Bowdern, and he took it upon himself to start the exorcism. He was aided by a couple of other Jesuits, and one of them kept a day-by-day diary on what happened. And that's the basis of the book, is the diary.
And you were you in contact with the actual priest that kept the diaries?
No. By the time I learned of this, he had died natural death in his 80s, and but the youngest Jesuit who was involved in the exorcism, I did talk to him. I was able to have interviews with him, and he gave me a copy of the diary, and he gave me extensive descriptions of what it was he saw night by night as the exorcism was going on.
What were some of the things that priest saw during the exorcism?
Well, he said that one of the things the most dramatic thing he saw was a bottle of holy water rise from a table next to the boy's bed and go through the air and wind up hitting a wall. It didn't break. That was one thing. Another thing, he was kneeling at the foot of a the bed, which was one of those old-fashioned brass beds. He was holding on to the bottom of the bed when he saw the mattress and the boy start to vibrate, go up and down, and he saw that with his own eyes, he said, and he felt that he was dealing with something that was impossible to explain.
And actually, I don't know if this is brought up already, but how old was the boy during this whole?
Actually, he was just turned 13.
Just turned 13. Okay. Now obviously, when there's also a lot of speculation around prepubescence when they hit puberty and all the raging hormones, that a lot of the times, a lot of the poltergeist theory is attributed to that. Now, do you think that had any factor in it as well, as far as what the priest saw?
There's always a problem with when you're dealing with a teenager in a case like this, because there's an old German concept called poltergeist, which is that there's a lively ghost in operation, and it seems to vibrate around teenagers. But in the case of this boy, the priests who were involved, and there were several of them besides the exorcists, really did believe that they were seeing something that was not natural and not supernatural, but they used the word preternatural, meaning something that was sort of beyond natural explanation.
Right. Okay. It's really hard to gauge, I guess, one way or the other one, unless you're actually there yourself. It's really tough to gauge.
Right. Yeah, that's why I feel that all I can do is report. I never felt the belief that other people might have had. I wasn't there. All I did was report the diary, which I published in full in my book. Is a testimony written by a priest, night by night, day by day, and when you read that, you really do wonder how could this have happened in a modern era. I mean, you think of exorcism as something biblical or something medieval, but this is something that was happening in the 1940s in the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing that comes across.
Sure. And there's even more cases, even more recent than this instance. I'm sure you've heard of Father Malachi Martin.
Yep.
And the book that he'd written, Hostage to the Devil, which outlines the 5 contemporary cases in the United States. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, those have occurred after this one. Yes,
it was.
Okay.
It was prepared. Well, I'm not sure if the book had come out before mine, but it wasn't. It had nothing on the St. Louis. It didn't have anything substantial on the St. Louis exorcism.
Right.
But there were subsequent editions. I mean, it happens. Sometimes a book will come out and then a second edition. It happened to me. After another edition came out, I had more material, and things keep changing in a case like this.
That's
so.
I think no.
Sorry?
Hello?
Sorry, I thought I cut yourself off, Steve. I cut you off earlier, so I apologize. Go ahead now.
Oh, that's okay. No, I was just going to ask Thomas. Now, after reading the diaries, can you sort of dive into the mental state that not only the priest that wrote the diaries as they went along, but the priests in general, like mentally, how were they, starting and then ultimately ending up? Mentally, they must have been exhausted beyond belief.
they were exhausted, but nothing serious happened to him. I mean, it wasn't as if some dramatic event occurred as it does in the movie. Father Bowder had been a chaplain in World War II and had seen a lot of enemy action. Father Halloran, who was the Jesuit who helped me on the story and who had been there in the room when this all happened, he served two tours in Vietnam as a chaplain. These were real active, intelligent, courageous people, and they didn't suffer from being in this experience. Father Bowdern, during the experience, lost a lot of weight. He had a brother who was concerned about his health because he lost weight. He was getting boils on his face, which was caused by some nervous disorder, apparently. But he had a real day job. He was running a parish on the campus of St. Louis University. So he was under terrific strain. But he lived to a fine old age, and the only thing he said about the experience, when the book about the exorcism was written, and the movie was being prepared, the author of the book and the play, the screenplay, found out that Father Bowdern had been the exorcist, and he wrote to him and said, "Could you tell me anything about it?" And Father Bowdern, I've seen the letter and a copy of it. Father Bowdern said that he couldn't give any details about what happened because he had pledged secrecy. But he said, "I will tell you one thing. What I was dealing with was real." And that was the word he used, real. The real thing, he said. He called it.
Now, geez.
So he was there, and I feel anybody else who comments on it comments from the fact that they weren't there. So I've always been careful of coming to any conclusions about it.
Now, was there any interaction whatsoever between you and William Blatty in terms of the novel? And
no, not during that time. Long after the book came out, we met, and we've talked several times. He has told me, and he's told other people, that my book is very accurate about what he knows about the situation that he walked into. And Blatty is very. I believe can't speak entirely for him, but I think that he feels that there was something there, and pretty much I do too, but I don't know what it is. There's no easy explanation for all this, I think.
Did he have
you can go spiritual with it or go psychological.
Did he have the same sort of I guess the same sort of information that you had? Did he have access to the diaries as well, or
no?
No.
But when he was writing the original novel, he knew about the case. He did have at least one exchange of letters with Father Bowdern, but he did not have the diary. He knew about the diary. but he didn't actually have it. But he had learned enough so that he was able to write a pretty accurate story. The basis for the story is the basis for the book and the movie. But don't forget, both the book and the movie were fictional, and my book is not fictional.
Exactly.
It's based on the diary.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wanted to clarify too. Exactly how yours is. Now, why do you think with the movie then did they change the fact? Well, I shouldn't say with the movie, with the book. I can't remember with the book. It might have been. I think it's with the book as well. That they actually changed. They changed it from a male to a female who was being possessed and exercised.
There were two reasons for that. Yeah, there were two reasons for that. One, and the basic one, was there were fears that the boy, who was by that time in his about in his 20s, would be exposed as the boy who had been exorcised. So in order to make it very, very difficult to anybody identify him, they just simply changed him from a boy to a girl. Plus, there is more of a tendency for exorcism to occur among young girls than among young boys, and it just produced a better story. Because it was fictional. So Blatty decided to fictionalize it in various ways, and one way he fictionalized it was to change the boy to a girl. And he put the whole exorcism in Georgetown when actually it took place in St. Louis.
St. Louis, yeah. Now, can you, I guess, dive into, from what you learned from the diaries and, of course, other sources, exactly what type of behavior during these exorcisms and even before was this particular boy exhibiting to actually warrant people to think that perhaps this boy is in fact possessed by something evil and maybe demonic or down that road?
Well, there were quite a number of events. The first thing that happened was the boy was living with his father and mother and grandmother in a house in a suburb of Washington, D.C. One night when the boy and the grandmother were alone in the house, they started hearing scratchings on the wall. They saw pictures sort of jump off the wall, and they heard this scratching sound in various parts of the house. When the father and mother came home, they told them about it. The father sent out for an exterminator, thinking that these were rats or mice. No mice or rats were found. And then things started getting a little bit more hard to understand or explain. The boy's mattress started shaking under him. Objects started to move around in his bedroom. And in school, his desk would move. It was one of those old-fashioned desks that is a combination of seat and one-arm desk, and that would just simply move around. And he would tell the teacher he didn't know why or how this was happening. And he seemed to be undergoing a personality change. And that was when the family decided it was necessary to seek some kind of help. They were leery of direct psychological help because, as I mentioned, at that time, there was this kind of snake pit idea for mental illness. They would just put people in a state institution, and that's where they would spend their lives. So they there was a fear of that kind of treatment of the boy. So instead of dealing with it psychologically, they decided to go to the minister, and the minister saw these. He saw the boy. He appeared that he was moving about on a blanket underneath his bed, seemingly propelled by some force that that the minister couldn't understand, and that was the way the boy then was handed over to a Catholic priest for the first of the two exorcisms. So what was going on was that the boy was acting so strangely that nobody could understand what it was that was causing this, and the consensus was that there had to be something going on that was beyond human understanding, and this led to the idea that it was that he was possessed by a demon.
There's a question I wanted to ask. Recently, I guess the first question would be, is this boy still alive, or is he now deceased?
To my knowledge, he's still alive.
Okay. And in his, I guess this whole ordeal, whether it was actually psychological or otherwise, as stated by the diary of the priest, this would have had to have a major impact on his psyche as he was getting older. Were there any indications, or did anybody know whether there were any indications that his whole mentality went changed for, I don't know whether it's better or worse as a result of this ordeal?
Well, in some ways, the most remarkable story about this was that when he came out of the exorcism, when he suddenly said, "It's gone, it's gone," and he was sitting at that point they had moved the boy to a Catholic hospital, and he was in a hospital room. He sat up and said, "It's gone," and he had no memory of anything that had happened. And as far as I know, from what I've heard and understood, he just lived a perfectly normal life after that. And there were no manifestations of mental illness afterward.
That's interesting. The only reason why I say this is from the cases I've read about, some of them in Father Malachi Martin's book and others, that there always seems to be an indication that after the ordeal is over, that it seems that these people have sort of something missing within themselves as a result of this whole ordeal.
I can't speak to that. I don't know. I've never met him. I've written to him and never received an answer, which is the way he has basically handled this whole issue. But I believe the Jesuits. I went to a Jesuit school myself. I have tremendous respect for the Jesuits, and they kept an eye on it through time, and felt that they had a certain responsibility for the boy, even as he grew up and married and had children, and they did keep an eye on him. And on the basis, it's only on the basis of third-hand information. But from what I know, there was no bad result from this.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, and I think it, as I said, that probably to me is in some ways more remarkable than the exorcism. I mean, that he went through an ordeal like that and came out the other side in okay condition.
Definitely, and I guess part of that might be also because he doesn't remember it, as you said earlier. That
right.
The whole deal happened. It's almost as if he was under hypnosis to some degree.
Well,
and
yeah, they did talk. The witnesses, the particularly, primarily the Jesuits, did say that he seemed to sometimes be in a coma or under a spell. They used words like that in trying to describe his condition. And he seemed to, quite often when they talking, the Father Haller, and when I talked to him, said that the boy would have his eyes closed quite often. In fact, he punched Father Halloran and broke his nose, and Halloran said that his eyes were closed when he swung his fist. So the idea that he was under some kind of a spell or a trance does show up in the diary as sort of a possibility that was going on.
Definitely.
When writing the book, Possessed, I guess not only taking the diaries into consideration, but trying to, explain exactly what was going on, and rather it be possession or medical condition or whatnot. Did you consult any persons in the scientific or even the medical field to try to sort of garner some explanations for what his conditions might have been, or likewise, or down that road?
Oh yeah. That's a good question. I happen to live very close to the National Institutes of Health and the National Institutes of Mental Health, and I did talk to a psychiatrist there who specialized in childhood psychiatric problems. And I spoke to a friend who was a psychiatrist who used hypnotism quite often in his practice. And down through the years, I've talked to probably a dozen psychiatrists in various ways, and pretty much all adds up to the same thing, and that is a basic skepticism that there's anything here that is supernatural, and secondly, a mystery. They have no idea why this happened. And third, and I think the most interesting thing, is that they believe it. I mean, that this wasn't made up. This is documented. It's the only modern exorcism in America that's ever been documented. And and that gets to be kind of convincing to people, I think.
Yeah, I'd definitely say. Now, what kind of response did the novel first get when it was first published?
Well, I eventually heard from a lot of people who had something to do with it. I heard from a lot of people who had some experiences. The curious thing I heard of the most was, I had mentioned in the book that this all seems to have started coincidentally when an aunt of his would come and visit. The aunt was a spiritualist. She did believe that it was possible to communicate with the dead. And she also believed in the Ouija board. And I mentioned the Ouija board in the book. And I got a lot of reaction to Ouija boards, to the point where people thought that was a curious element in this story. Did the Ouija board put him into some kind of a condition that would affect his whole psyche? And it's never been, I've never had it explained out to me, but I do feel that the Ouija board was probably a factor in this whole story, but it's a factor that is almost impossible to track down and explain. But when you asked about what kind of reactions, that was one of the unexpected reactions was stories about Ouija boards.
Yes,
which you probably dealt with.
Yeah,
Ouija board is
several times.
An interesting topic. It's an interesting topic to Steve and I. We discussed this a few times.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah.
But,
not. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Thomas. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying that I did poke around a little bit, did some research on Ouija boards, and there is a psychiatric belief that, or a belief by some psychiatrists, that the Ouija board simply gives you an opportunity to be a little bit more open about your own beliefs or your own fears, and you're transferring to the Ouija board the idea that the Ouija board is speaking for you, and of course what you're doing is you're doing the speaking, but you're allowing your subconscious to come to some kind of resolution with something you may have in your head. I mean, I know one case that I heard about where people were just four teenage girls who were just doing a Ouija board, and they were talking about the boyfriends and what was going on in school, and suddenly one of them said, "When will I die?" And that obviously was something big on her mind, and that stopped the game. Nobody really wanted the Ouija board to give that date out. By the way, she's still alive. She's in her mid-50s. But it struck me as the question that was so big on her mind, and she knew there was something going on in her life, I think, and it wasn't too long after that, right around that time, that her mother committed suicide. So, I mean, did she sense that there was something going on with her mother and then transferred this to the Ouija board? I don't know. But yeah, that to me was the biggest surprise that came out in terms of reaction to the book.
Yeah, in terms of how you mentioned the Ouija board, and yeah, that's a topic that we've discussed several times, and have had several people on to discuss that, and it's possible links to opening up doors that we simply just have no understanding of, and what may come through those doors. Again, it's just like saying if somebody's actually possessed by something that might be demonic. And we tend to say that something like this, obviously, and again, and when you look at the case that you covered with the boy in St. Louis there, it's a rarity. Something true to this nature, it's very rare that something like this is actually can be documented as something being, I guess, if you will, supernatural or evil in a sense, where somebody was possessed by something demonic.
Yeah, and I think the rarity really has to do with the intense secrecy that normally surrounds any exorcism. I mean, neither the exorcist nor the person who's the victim wants to talk about it, and so we don't really see much. That's why the diary that was the basis for my book was pretty remarkable. It was supposed to have been kept secret, but Father Halloran, who gave me the copy I have, said that he was a good friend of the exorcist, Father Bowdern, and he said that Father Bowdern went into this thing completely ignorant of exorcism. It was very difficult to do research. He really had to make it up as he went along. Not made it up in the sense of making up the prayers. He knew that he was supposed to just crown these prayers out again and again and again, prayers of exorcism. And but he felt that he owed it to priests who were in the future who would never would have any record. So he decided that a record was necessary, and that record was to have remained secret, but Father Halloran felt that there was no need for secrecy anymore, and that it would provide valuable information about the whole idea of what's it like for the way an exorcism would be conducted. So anyway, that's the reason it exists. It's because one of the priests involved, Father Halloran, really believes that people ought to know what goes on with an exorcism.
And I guess with the and nowadays, especially nowadays, with the amount of people that are coming out of the woodwork and claiming to be exorcists or demonic, however you want to put it, however they put it, an exorcist or whatnot. It's really, really hard to decipher or figure out exactly what is a reality and what's not, and how you explain your experience with researching this particular case. I mean, obvious, like you mentioned as well, these people don't want to talk about it, or probably in a lot of cases they've been through so much mental strain that they, in the case of the boy, can't even remember a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. But that not remembering things is really common with traumatic experience. I mean, people do talk about, I can't remember a thing, or that whole story that lots of times in a criminal situation or in a highly dramatic situation, people say, I can't remember. I don't remember the details. I don't remember how this happened. And people act as if they have some kind of a mental blackout. And that's probably something that we can thank our minds from keeping terrible things out of our active memory. They're in there somewhere, and they can haunt us, and they can come up later. But you can go through your life after having had a traumatic experience. So I think that's what happened to the boy.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of you, how did the novel change you? Did it?
Well, it wasn't a novel; it was for real.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I keep saying novel. I shouldn't say novel. The book. We'll say the book. Possessed. Yeah. Like, I mean, after going through the research and then the rough cut and then finally the final print and then finally being published. I mean, how different was it for you after the book was released?
I wish I could tell you something dramatic happened. It didn't. I mean, I'm a writer. I'm primarily a journalist. I write nonfiction. I suppose I could tell you. I mean, I'll tell you one thing that did happen during the writing of the book, rather than after the book. I did realize a couple of times when I was writing that I could. There was in my mind a boundary that I could go over, and if I went in across that boundary, I could write about this in a different way. I would be writing of it on a different plane, and I realized that that's not where I am. That's not who I am. It's not what I do, and so I just stayed on this side of the boundary. And I did feel that there was a boundary out there, and when I was trying to figure out what it was all about, what I came up with was that if I were living in even in the mid-18th century, say, and someone started telling me about electricity and all the things that electricity was capable of doing, and that it was going to make us able to talk over a wire and talk without wires, and that that there was a whole age coming in which this whole new force called electricity was going to affect our lives, I wouldn't know what that person was talking about, and I wouldn't be able to believe it. And somehow that made me feel, when I had that thought and was able to make that analogy, I felt, okay, my job is to write on this side of the boundary, not go over to the other one where there's all kinds of spooky and weird and indescribable and undefinable events.
Mm-hmm.
I'm staying on this side. And so that's the effect it did have on me. It intensified my determination to try to be objective about strange behavior.
Exactly, and it makes sense when you're.
Do you get what I said? Maybe.
Yeah. No. Maybe. Absolutely. No.
Yeah.
No. Absolutely. I can completely understand that, and it, like you said, it makes perfect sense with approaching a subject such as this. I mean, the subject alone, you're walking a fine line in terms of the truth.
Exactly.
What's a reality and what's superficial, and that it makes complete sense to approach it that way. I completely agree. Thomas, you know what? You know what? Before we go here, is there something that you have coming out that you'd like to get out there that so people could probably look into? A new novel, a new book?
180 degrees from what we've been talking about. I got interested in the American Revolution, and I've written a couple of books, but the one that will be coming, actually it's coming out next month, is called Tories, and it's about the Americans who were not for the revolution, who fought other Americans, and it's called Tories Fighting for the King in America's First Civil War. And that's coming out in November.
Okay, and that's available.
So I never went back. Beg pardon?
Sorry. That will be available on your website and Amazon and.
Yeah. You'll see it on the website. And,
okay, and once it. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry,
go ahead.
That's me.
Sorry.
I was just going to give out your website once again so everybody can find that. The website is tballen.com to find out more about Thomas and what he's written. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's right. So thank you for putting that out. And it was good talking to you. I hope that you continue to look at things that are hard to understand. I think we all have to do that once in a while.
Yes. It's. I think it's ingrained in us all. I think we're all wondering what is going on, and we all sort of have a inquisitive mind on subjects such as, well, obviously what you'd written with Possessed. So it's very, very little. Well, I shouldn't say there's very little out there. There's a lot out there now, but in terms of what's entertainment based and what's reality is a whole different story.
There's a lot of speculation out there, but not necessarily anything that's as definitive as the diary. So
absolutely. Well, Thomas, thank you. It's been a great honor to have you on the show.
Well, good luck in your looking for explanations.
Thank you very much. Exactly.
Okay.
Well, you certainly given us a good hour. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
All right, and there you go. There was our second hour interview from last night's show. Once again, download the podcast to at the beginning of this rebroadcast to find out exactly why we're rebroadcasting this particular interview with Thomas B. Allen. the author of Possessed, the actual story tale from the diaries of the assisting priest who was taking care of the exorcism of the well-known case that inspired The Exorcist. Our next show will be Wednesday, October 13th. Our good friend Pat Fitzgerald will be back on to talk about the Bell witch haunting, give us an update there, plus much more. That's next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until then, take care, and thank you for listening to this rebroadcast. Leave your comments and suggestions and whatnot on the show page here, iTunes or Planet Paranormal. You can find all the links on our show page. Take care.